Welcome all. Today we're going to be having a conversation about something we don't often do in Armenia, about labor rights, the good old labor movement, and workers' rights. To discuss this, I'm joined by the Executive Director of the Solidarity Center, Ms. Shawna Bader Blau. So Ms. Shawna Bader Blau, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, workers' rights, labor rights is a conversation we need to have in Armenia. It's not often had. But before we get into the Armenia context, can you explain a bit about the Solidarity Center? As I understand, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, workers' rights organizations based in the United States. So can you explain to us exactly what is the Solidarity Center?
Sure, yes. So the Solidarity Center is a US-based global worker rights organization. We're connected to the American trade union movement, and we work across the world in 70 countries. With unions and worker rights organizations that represent themselves more than 70 million people around the world. So our goal is really to help workers in every country on earth increase the dignity and rights at work so that people who go to work experience the right to form their own unions, have the freedom to raise their voice if there's problems, have health and safety respected in the workplace, and where women, men, and all workers have equity and equality to achieve higher standards for all our families.
And the Solidarity Center has, worked in, I believe, more than 60 countries. So when you come to countries like Armenia or other countries similar to Armenia in similar situations, what exactly are you looking for? What's the purpose of the visit, for example?
Yeah, so the Solidarity Center's mission is really to help workers across the globe raise working conditions and standards. So we really believe that workers in every country have these universal fundamental rights at work. And so we tend to engage unions in all countries for decades. This is not a one-time, one-year prospect in improving working conditions in any country. And so we form long-term partnerships. We have known the unions of Armenia for many years. We've only recently had the opportunity to open an office in 2021 and really dig in and build partnerships on the ground here. And so what we do is we immediately get in touch with all the worker organizations, be they recognized trade unions, independent trade unions, and also civil society organizations who care about issues like women's rights at work or the right of all Armenians to have unions and play a role in their democracies.
Yeah, I mean, there is really this history of the labor movement in the United States and in other countries, a rich history. And oftentimes I feel like certain people don't really understand the importance of unions and how the history of the workers' unions in these countries have benefited employers' rights. In Armenia, there's a big conversation about the rights of employees, and that's a conversation which has been ongoing for many years. But my question would be, how would you describe to your average, in layman's terms, what is the importance of a union? Why is that so important? And why did that take such a long time, such a long history to get to the point where, you have now employees' rights in many countries?
Well, it's really a more than 200-year-old movement across many countries in the global north and global south. Trade unions played fundamental roles, for example, in liberation movements in countries across Africa and Latin America, for example. The connection between democracy and the rights of workers has always been hand in hand, and the question of justice and social justice comes hand in hand. Think of your own day, any of the viewers of this show. A lot of your day is at work, If you work full-time, maybe 8, 10, 12 hours of your day. In that time, your best hours, and you're meant to be your best self. If in that time you are experiencing degrading working conditions, low pay, poor treatment, and you have no way to fix that, the rest of your life is deeply affected, internally as well as with your family, and your ability to help your family get ahead is deeply impacted. But the opposite is also true. When workers as colleagues can come together and collectively decide, what, these conditions are not right, we deserve more, we deserve fair treatment, and go to the employer collectively, that's called a union, and say, look, we're not going to take it anymore. We want something better, and start to demand through a collaborative conversation with the employer at first, and leading to a bargaining over better jobs for everyone in that workplace. people feel a sense of pride and dignity as workers that they didn't feel before, and that affects their lives. It also goes out into the community, because if you think of the issues workers care about, like equality between women and men, or like the right to have a safe workplace that is not filled with chemicals that can make you sick, those are not really issues that only live in the workplace. So the other importance of unions is when they come together at work, they also, in society, make strong demands and arguments with their governments at the local level or the national level that all people in the country deserve these rights too. And so unions play a role in fighting for better health care for all people, the right to retire so you don't have to work until you are too sick to move, the right to enjoy weekends and vacations, and the right to have your fundamental right to speak up as a worker. And so those workplace organizations called trade unions move into society and play this fundamental role in helping lift standards for everybody.
It's interesting also in a lot of the Western countries, there's circles that will stigmatize this trade unions, but then in other countries where they're not as present in the social consciousness, there's a yearning for like a more active, a more established labor rights movement. I also want to ask that, a lot of times we think that politics is the arena for change, but one thing I find very interesting about Armenia is that civil society is so vibrant, and that actually could be a better avenue for change than some of the political avenues. The trade unions fit into civil society, don't they?
They do, and trade unions are historically, in most country contexts, the largest civil society organizations. If you look at Armenia, there's well over 100,000 union members in the country. So it becomes a very, if activated and active, playing the role in the workplace and in community and society, could have a major transformational impact on living and working conditions and democracy in the country.
Mm-hmm. And when you've been observing what's happening in Armenia, I mean, you were here for a short trip this time, but as you mentioned, a center was opened in 2021, I believe. So can you speak a bit about the Solidarity Center's cooperation with, Armenian trade unions? What is their observations? What do they find perhaps, surprising, impressive? What needs to be worked on? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, so we work directly with several organizations, both in the trade union movement and in civil society. Mm-hmm. In the trade union movement, Armenia's historic federation is called the Confederation of Trade Unions of Armenia, recently elected 2 women leaders for the first time in its more than 100-year history to run the labor movement, and that's a really exciting change. They're also younger than people have historically been used to in leadership in the labor movement. So really dynamic opportunities. We know also the government is currently reviewing labor laws and revising lots of standards. So it's a pretty exciting time to think about what's possible if unions and the rest of civil society can join forces to help strengthen the labor movement and strengthen civil society's voice on labor issues. Because the government at this moment seems to be open to some suggestions and changes, and we think labor should jump into that moment and take advantage.
And also, it's not just labor rights that are envisaged. We can also talk about gender-based violence, discrimination. These also fit in, don't they, to the work of the Solidarity Center and other trade union organizations around the world.
100%. All the issues that exist in society show up at work, and very prominently gender equality is a main one. We know in Armenia, like in a lot of the world, it's not unique to Armenia, women are paid less than men for the same work. We know that in Armenia, the gender pay gap, both within the same profession, same workplace, but also between professions, is at least 30%. And what that means is millions and millions of, I'll use my terminology, dollars, much money for society is actually being lost to discrimination. When women are paid less than men for the same work, families are suffering as a result. And so in the workplace, when we talk about equity and equal opportunity, we mean fairness and equity between and amongst all workers, regardless of gender. And so that is a core fight of the labor movement. And with more women's leadership in the labor movement, it's becoming an even more prominent issue, not only in Armenia, but in many countries where that same transformation has taken place, where women have come up through the ranks of the labor movement. Maybe they were teachers, maybe they were in another profession, joined the unions, became active, played a more prominent role, and over the years are now taking leadership positions. And so issues like the gender pay gap are more prominent than they've ever been before. But not just that, health and safety conditions. I mean, we know in a country like Armenia, people work in farms or food processing, mining, anywhere where there's chemicals. There are very common safety issues that workers face, and the laws in Armenia are being improved and updated now, but they're not quite at international standards, and so it's the labor movement's job to fight for that.
That was one of the reasons why the labor movement started, wasn't it? The safety conditions in a lot of factories in the Western countries. In general, what are some of the Solidarity Center's plans for the future, perhaps even pertaining to Armenia?
We're super excited about the work we've been able to do. Over the last 18 months, we've had workshops and seminars and mentoring opportunities with more than 600 Armenian union activists, 300 of whom are most of them under 35, by the way, and 300 of whom are still in colleges and vocational schools where they're having the first time to learn what their expectations should be when they enter the workforce as new young leaders taking on their first careers. What are the rights they should expect and be able to demand? So we're really invested in supporting young people in Armenia to rebuild a labor movement focused on social justice and democracy in Armenia. We're also really excited about the large number of civil society organizations outside the labor movement that are newly focused on workplace rights, particularly around, as you raised, gender-based violence and harassment, which is an issue in every country and Armenia. And so the ability for civil society organizations and trade unions to come together to fight for equity and equality for women at work, for safe conditions for men and women and all Armenians, and for young people to have first-time opportunities to play a leading role in building and rebuilding and revitalizing the labor movement. It's extremely exciting to watch and support and be a part of.
Okay, well, Ms. Shawna Bader Blau, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.